There's a whole group that's insisting on reparations. I think they have things a bit backwards, so let's have a talk about this. The very definition of economics is the science of the allocation of limited resources. But in the 1970s, when there was a upheaval in our society, they wouldn't let you say that. You have to give us everything we ask for, they would say, because all you have to do is pay interest on the debt, and the United States is so large, you can theoretically carry that interest on forever. Now we're $35 trillion in debt. I think they made a mistake. Remember, they cashed in on everything. They forced people to have to work more hours. They caused poverty. And they did it through violence. You couldn't say the word no to these people. They would take to the streets. Remember also, if I take a step back and arrange things along the lines of the classic battle of good and evil, it's Harry the hippie and Al the Afro and Donna the feminist are on one side, and we're on the other side. In the classic definition of good and evil, they're evil. We'll pause for a second. Not far from here and just east of the University of Arizona here in town, there's a whole section of houses that are rather expensive, several times more expensive than the average house. They're full of university professors and doctors that work at the hospital. There's a huge hospital place here. There's signs all over the place for Kamala Harris. And along with them are other signs, and one of them says, you have to watch it. You have to do what's best for your daughter. Let's have a talk about this one, all things considered. Let's just start listing things. There's a whole class of people who are, in a sense, who live in poverty. You can see them on the computer all the time. Look, the gal says, after taxes, she has to pay $1,600 a month in rent. She only has $500 left to buy food and everything else. She can't do this. How's she going to get that kid raised? And the answer is she can't. She is in a class of peasantry. And how about the guy? You know what it's like to be a guy and not make enough money to be able to support a wife and child? Especially if you find yourself raising somebody else's child, which is quite common now, and that little guy is starting to call you dad, and there's no way you can support him. That's straight on the shoulders of Kamala Harris. Let's add a third thing to make a point. I'm told far and away one of the biggest causes of bankruptcy is medical expenses, trying to pay the doctor. Remember when female doctors first came into being here in the United States? They really didn't have jobs. They were called the Consumption Society. Remember? Hubby was still paying the gas and electric bill, and so their income, and a doctor makes pretty good income once they get through school, was extra income. And with that, they used to go out and buy property and rent it out to other people. They cashed in on it all. They also did other things that turned out to be hellacious. They would take time out to raise their kids, and lots of doctors would simply quit so they could raise their own family. Let's remind everyone of something else. When the women's liberation movement was putting women back in the workplace, I have to use that word lightly because a home economist is a job. When they were putting women back in the workplace, they would crawl out from under the cruel yoke of children. And it was only a few years into it where they decided they had to have time out to have a child and that sort of thing. Wait a minute, that very act, throwing out the gal that was the professional home economist and putting themselves in and then putting their emotions above it all, that's a fundamental act of child abuse. And the courts should have stepped in and said, nonsense, nope, sorry about that. If you want to be a doctor, you can follow in the footsteps of the Catholic nun, and all would have been well, but they didn't. And so it was their intent. They, the female doctor, the women's liberation movement, as well as Harry the hippie and Al the Afro were as malicious as a human being and a society could get. They did it with a blank check and unlimited resources. And so when you see those university professors and those doctors talking about how they have to help the daughter and the gal, that's fundamentally wrong, to put it as politely as it could possibly be. Let's keep going a little farther. There's a ladder there, isn't there? There's a university professor, and they're deliberately malicious. Sometimes I just like to act like a scoundrel, they would say. And then one rung down the ladder are people who are just saying the trend is your friend and cashing in on it all, and they couldn't care less about anyone else. And then another rung down the ladder might be those kind of people. You walk up and the pimp walks up and puts his hand on their shoulders and says, "You're okay, you're not going to fight." And they would rather somebody else starve than fight, than be confrontive to them. Why? Why can't people just get along, they say. And then they'll let those people over there starve so that they don't have to be confrontive to anybody. And one or two more rungs down on the ladder, there's our group, the group that says, these guys, we were hustled, and we better get up and do something about this. We're not really guilty because someone hustles us, but now it's our turn. Now we better get up and do something about it. If you aren't confrontive to those people over there, those people over here will starve. We're right back where we started from. How do you stand up to people who just aren't very nice? These elections are coming up, and they're an absolute joke. Remember that that it's not a question anymore of Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal. It's a question of going back and rearranging things along the classic battle of good and evil. I straighten out my emotions. It's race relegated to an endearing quality of your parents. I will the good of another person. I have home economics, and I do it because God exists. That puts us squarely on the other side of those guys. And again, this election is a big joke. For Trump to win, he would have to have overwhelming support by everybody. Otherwise, remember, they threw out the Australian balloting system. There's no way you can tell whether somebody's being corrupt or not. You can't prove a negative that way. Very much to mention the fact that most of the people we're talking about have no business voting in a democracy. You only let people who are within the curbs of the road vote. All that said, let's insist. You have to speak up and insist on reparations. But those reparations are honest. They go in our favor. We'll see you.